Hi, it's Feature from Soulmate. Welcome to my channel. If you want to see how I make this beautiful tiered skirt, please stay tuned. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please do. And make sure to turn on your notification bell so that each time I upload new videos, you get notified. So this skirt pattern is going to be drafted a bit different from what we normally do because we're not going to be using a basic skirt block pattern to do this. We're going to construct our skirt pattern using calculations which are very simple. You'll see how I'll do it. You can do this directly onto your fabric, but I'm going to be using paper so that you can be able to see what I'm doing clearly. So this can also be called a layered skirt or a gypsy skirt pattern. So what you need for this is just your hip measurement. Because my skirt is going to be using an elastic waistband, we want our skirt to be able to be pulled up through the hips nicely, okay, without it being tight or anything. So get your hip measurement, add 4 centimeters east to width, and add 2 seam allowances to this measurement, okay. If you use a seam allowance of 1 inch, make sure to add 2 inches. If you use 1.5 like I do centimeters, I have to put 3 centimeters. That's what I mean. So adding all this together, I come up with 129 centimeters, and I'm gonna divide this by 2 to get 65 centimeters. I'm doing this because I want to cut my patterns on fabric which is on fold, okay. So I decided to make my skirt 3 tiers, as you can see on my illustration here, which is 25 centimeters for first tier, 25 centimeters second tier, and 30 centimeters for the final tier. All in all, it will give me 80 centimeters length, okay. So we still have some considerations to make on these measurements because we are going to be attaching this tier, the second tier, to the first tier, meaning we have a seam allowance here. So it means we add a seam allowance to this tier and a seam allowance to this tier. Same applies here, seam allowance to this and seam allowance to the tier below as well. Now for the final section here, we need a hem allowance, so we have to add a hem allowance here as well. Then at the top here, we got an elastic waistband, meaning we need an elastic casing there at the top. So coming over to this section here, these are the fabrics that we're going to be cutting. All of them will be on fold, and I decided to cut all of mine along the cross grain because I don't want to be joining too many pieces of fabrics together, okay. So the first section, which is tier 1, it's going to have an elastic casing for this elastic here. So get your elastic, whatever elastic you want to use, measure your elastic width, and you're going to add 5 millimeters to that. So mine is 4.5, adding 5 millimeters, I get 5 centimeters all in all, okay. And at the top of the elastic casing, we're going to add a seam allowance, okay. So whatever seam allowances you use, you're going to add that to your amount, okay. So at the bottom, which is for the bottom of this tier here, we're going to add a seam allowance again here so we can join the first tier to the second tier. So for me, I'm using 1 centimeter seam allowances, okay. So then what it means is that this 25 centimeters, I'm going to add 5 centimeters elastic casing, and then 1 centimeter for the seam allowance at the top and another 1 centimeter for the seam allowance at the bottom, giving me a total of 32 centimeters for my first tier, okay. Moving on to the second tier, we've got our 25 centimeters length here, and we're going to go ahead and add the seam allowance to join these two together and another seam allowance at the bottom to join these two together, meaning 25 plus 1 plus 1 for the 2 seam allowances. For me, I'm getting 27 centimeters, okay. Then moving to the third tier, we've got 30 centimeters here, but remember we've got a seam allowance to add at the top and a hem allowance to add at the bottom, okay. So for my seam allowances, I'm using 1 centimeter, and for the hem allowance, I'm going to add 2 centimeters, meaning 30 plus 3, giving me 33 centimeters for the length of the third tier. Okay, now to get the length of our fabrics, for the first tier we're going to be using this 65 centimeters we measured on our hip measurement. You will be using yours because it will be different for everyone anyway. 65 centimeters for the first tier. Then for the second tier, I'm just going to multiply the 65 centimeters by 1.5 to get 98 centimeters. Okay, for the third tier, I'll get the 98 centimeters and multiply it by 1.5 again, and I'm gonna get 147 centimeters. Okay, so that's it. So it means I'm going to be cutting rectangles of fabrics on fold, which is 65 by 32 for the first tier, 98 by 27 for the second tier, and 33 by 147 for the third tier. Okay, so the top of the second tier is going to be gathered so that it fits the top end of the first tier, and we're going to do the same again, gather the top end of the third tier to match the end of the second tier. Okay, so that's it with our pattern making. So from this stage you're going to go ahead and cut these 3 rectangles of fabric, and then we start with sewing our skirts. Okay, putting these on the side. Now moving on to sewing our gypsy skirt. What we've got are the 3 layers of fabrics that are cut already, and we also have our elastic. Just get your exact waist measurement. For the fabric, I'm going to be using this beautiful poplin fabric. Okay, now get your second and third layer of fabric, and we're going to go ahead and sew with 2 rows of gathering stitches at one end of the fabrics. Okay, for the second and third layer, just sew within your seam allowances, meaning you're sewing with the longest stitch. You're not sewing machine, leaving ends at the end. Okay, let's go and do that for both layer 2 and 3. Okay, now so that's done. So what we're going to do is to go ahead and gather our second tier to match with the bottom end of our first tier here. Okay, so I'm just gonna be doing the gathering now. Now we're going to go ahead and lay our fabrics right sides facing. And pin along the top edge. Making sure that we're going to be distributing all our gathering evenly. That's done. So then we're going to go ahead and just turn our pattern like this to the right side with the second tier on top like this. Okay, so now we're going to get our third tier, gather it as well at the top, and make sure that it matches this end here, and we're going to pin it along there. Okay, so now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and sew down our layers and overlock them, and we'll be back here. Okay, now so that's done, and now I'm going to go on and close off the open seam here. I'm going to be putting mine at the center back. You can put yours at the side or wherever you prefer, it doesn't matter. Now I'm going to go ahead and pin along the open seam, making sure to match all my layers here. Now we're going to go ahead and sew along this seam from the hem all the way to the top and overlock it, and then we're going to go to the bottom of our skirt and we're going to hem it. So I'm just going to do a double turned hem at 1 centimeter, okay, and just sew right round. Let's do that. Okay, now so that's done. So the next thing we're going to do is to sew our elastic casing. So first we're going to take this to the iron, and we're going to iron under 1 centimeter the whole way for the waistline, and then a further 5 centimeters for the elastic casing. You use your own amount according to the elastic width you have. Okay, let's go and do that. Okay, now so that's done. So what I'm gonna do is to take this to the sewing machine and give it an edge stitching right round, and make sure to leave a gap of about 5 centimeters on one end. Okay, that's where we're going to use to put in our elastic. Okay, let's do that. Now we're going to go ahead and push the elastic through the gap here. Now we're gonna grab the ends of our elastic and we're going to overlap them by 1 centimeter, pin them along, take this to the sewing machine and join them with a zigzag stitch here. Okay, let's do that. Okay, now so that's done. Now we're going to go ahead and put in our elastic. Okay, so we're gonna take this to the sewing machine and just finish off sewing the gap that we left there with an edge stitching. Then I'm gonna go ahead and add about 2 lines of stitching to my waistband here to avoid the elastic turning around inside there. Okay, let's go and do that. Okay, now so that's done. I went ahead and gave it a nice press, and my skirt is finished, and I'm happy with the result. Thank you.